100% sure, so hopefully I can bring a bit of certainty to that today. I also want to cover some things about the upcoming federal budget, which is due to be handed down next Tuesday, and also look at the possibilities surrounding the upcoming election. So the first thing I want to cover is the prorogation of Parliament that happened on the 17th of April. Why that happened, what was actually involved, and what that means for business that's currently before the Parliament. So the Prime Minister wanted very much to have the Australian Building and Construction Commission bills debated one way or the other, and if they were passed, he said, that's fine, we'll continue through to term, and we'll use those bills to bring a bit of discipline to the building and construction industry. On the other hand, if they're not, he's pledged to use that as a trigger for a double dissolution election. The government has had a bit of trouble getting legislation through the Senate. They pretty much need either Labor, the Greens or both to go along with them, or to get absolutely all of the crossbenchers. As it stands at the moment, if Labor and the Greens are against something in the Senate, they only need 2 of the crossbenchers to join them and they can block government legislation. The government's finding this untenable at the moment. There are some programs that they want to push forward that they can't do with the Parliament as it stands. So rather than go to a conventional election where the crossbench senators that they see as problematic who came in at the last election would still be hanging around for another 3 years, what they want to do is have that double dissolution election, both houses of Parliament completely dissolved, everyone has to stand for election again, and the government, of course, is hoping that it comes back with at least a majority in the House of Reps and, with the best of luck, a majority in the Senate, that they can get their legislative platform moved along without too much hindrance. So, the prorogation was needed because they needed the extra time to discuss these bills. The last possible date that the government can call a double dissolution election is May the 11th. The reason for this is that you can't do that. You can't call a double dissolution in the last 6 months of a Parliament. The reason that was put in place was because governments were getting to the last 2 or 3 months thinking, oh, well, let's just roll the dice on the whole thing and call in double dissolutions. So in order to prevent that, they've put the 6-month provision in there. Now that, sorry.
Question. So when you have a double dissolution, you get rid of the Senate, does that 8-year term start again so that they're always going to be going together? Because they usually do.
No, it doesn't actually. That's a really interesting question. And the parties decide who will get short terms and long terms. So half of the senators will be elected for a 3-year term and half will be elected for a 6-year term. Conventionally, that's done based on their order of election.
How high up the ticket they are?
Exactly right, or for at least for senators who are returning, where they were on the ticket at the previous election. That can have some unintended effects. So that may not be the convention that they follow. It's not a legal requirement. The parties can decide between them who goes where, but there will be senators who, if there is a double dissolution election, will only be on a 3-year term and will have to stand again at the next election.
How does that work with independents?
Yes, there's so many of them.
That is a very good question. So, as to how they would allocate those things, I would imagine that they would be the low person on the totem pole. In that
so
instance.
it goes to their proportion of votes?
I would have thought so. Yeah, because in most jurisdictions it will either be a Liberal or a Labor senator that comes in first, and then a Labor or Liberal senator that comes in second, and it usually goes 1-2, 1-2, and then the 5th and 6th, say Greens or an independent or something along those lines. So I imagine they might not have a lot of leverage in that situation. On the other hand, if there is a double dissolution election, it will be easier for minor parties and independents to get back in, because rather than needing the 14% quota that they would they would have to achieve at a conventional election, they'll only need to achieve a 7% quota. So people like Jackie Lambie, like Glenn Lazarus, who have a strong personal following, they believe that they'll have no trouble being re-elected, especially if there's a double dissolution. So in order to get those bills debated again, there wasn't going to be enough time to do it just during budget week if budget was going to be on the 10th, because they couldn't get the appropriations bills passed in 2 days, so they had to move budget forward. Even allowing an extra week of that, it still might not have been enough time to get the building and construction bills debated and the budget passed, so they needed an extra couple of weeks. So in order to do that and add weeks into the sitting calendar, they needed to prorogue the previous session of Parliament and start up a new session. So the PM wrote a letter to the Governor-General advising him to prorogue Parliament, and the Governor-General consented to that. That prorogation happened on April the 17th, and then a new session was convened on Monday the 18th. Now, the effect of that prorogation is that everything drops off the notice paper. So every question on notice falls aside and every bill lapses. Now, they still want to debate some of those bills, so in order to do that, they can move a motion to restore to the notice paper in either house. If it's passed the House of Reps and it's currently sitting before the Senate can restore it, but it requires a motion from the Reps to restore in the Senate, which is exactly what happened with the building and construction bills. There were also about 10 other bills that were restored in that way, but most were private members' bills and don't appear likely to go anywhere. Now, as we know, those building and construction bills were voted down, and although the government already had a double dissolution trigger in terms of the registered organisations bill, they needed something that was more timely and more urgent, that they could say to the Governor-General, this has just happened and now we want that double dissolution. An interesting question I had this week was, if the coalition were to return to government, could they restore a bill to the notice paper from the previous Parliament? Because, of course, all bills are going to lapse when Parliament's dissolved and they go to an election. And the answer to that question is no. In order for the person who asked me, they were tracking a particular bill for one of their partners who, from the tone of the message, was quite keen for that bill to pass. And they asked me, is this bill going to be restored? I said, well, that's at the government's discretion, but if they do restore it, they need to get it all the way through Parliament before the election is called. Otherwise, it would lapse, and under Standing Order 136, bills can only be restored to the notice paper between sessions, but not between parliaments. So if they did want to if the coalition does come back and they want to revive some piece of legislation from the previous Parliament, they'll need to introduce it in a new form. Okay.
Can I just ask what happens if Labor's not supplying the budget?
That's a very good question. Then I guess they would just go straight to election.
Yeah?
Yeah, it would cause an enormous problem, but it would, I guess, only further reinforce the need for that double dissolution.
I guess so.
Yeah, that would really
They've got nothing to lose, really, do they?
Aside from really annoying the public service who getting paid. I think it would be a drastic move. I haven't seen Labor give any inclination that that's what they intend to do. And I think going into, or effectively already being in an election campaign, I wonder whether that might not be seen as something of a petty or a spiteful move that might backfire on them, I think. So I think it's unlikely. Okay. So, in order to get ready for that double dissolution, they've had to move the budget day forward by a week. So, with budget coming out on Tuesday, we want to be able to provide our customers with all of the budget information immediately that the Treasurer begins his speech at 7:30. In order to do that, we participate in the federal budget lock-up. So from about 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, there'll be a team of 12 people from Capital Monitor in the budget lock-up with all of the political and finance journalists. So it's quite a big day, a big event. For a lot of our sub-editors, it's quite cool to be sitting 2 tables away from David Koch, and there's David Spears, and Hugh Riminton's 2 seats down from me. And immediately that we go in there, we've got the budget papers, we've got all the ministerial media releases, and we're going through and analysing all that material to have a report ready for customers as soon as possible at 7:30 after the budget lock-up ends. This will be my 4th budget lock-up. I've done one as a sub-editor, just getting the raw source material, scanning it and uploading it to our collection. I've also done one as an editorial assistant, abstracting material for the newsletters, and this will be my 2nd budget lock-up as managing editor, and I'll be coordinating the whole team that's producing the report. So collating all the content and getting that report ready to go out. We're going to release this year's report in 2 separate stages. For the second one, we're going to be partnering with Moore Stephens Accountants, and they'll be providing some of the analysis of the budget and what that actually means for business and industry that our customers have asked for in the past. That content will need to be reviewed by Moore Stephens partners. So in order to get our content out to customers as quickly as possible, we're going to have a version of the report without Moore Stephens analysis ready to go as soon as practical after 7:30, and we'll get that out to you straight away and get it uploaded to our website. Also on that night, once all the analysis has been reviewed, it'll be added to the report, and that completed report will be sent out. So you'll get it in 2 stages. You'll have our abstracts of the raw source material with links to it, so that as soon as possible after the lock-up you can get a good idea of what's going on and have access to all the raw source documents, but then with that analysis to follow soon thereafter. Okay. So, once the budget is done and...
Just one more.
Yeah, of course.
Is there anything... Typically, the budgets in the last 10 years have been pretty unexciting.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much excitement about this one, I don't think.
No.
Is there anything... Quick question to you.
Yep.
Anything exciting in the budget I should be aware of?
I think the Prime Minister's going to great efforts to make it sound as though the budget will be as unexciting as possible.
Yes.
In that he's ruled out an awful lot of things. So changes to negative gearing, changes to income tax, changes to capital gains tax. Any of those sorts of announcements might make it a quite interesting budget, but he's been very adamant in downplaying those sorts of possibilities. I think they're going to go with a fairly small target approach with an election coming up. Aside from the cybersecurity strategy that was announced last week, $230 million, there haven't been a lot of big spending type of announcements. And probably in the last month, they've floated a lot of stuff at COAG that's been quickly shouted down. So whether it was devolving hospital and schools funding to the states, that received a lot of pushback. I think they were floating a lot of potential policy. None of it seems to have got traction. So no, there's no real big ticket announcement that I can think of that's going to be relevant, unless they're going to spring something as a surprise on budget night. They may do that as just something to kick off the election campaign. At least in the last couple of years, the government's been quite vulnerable to internal leaks, in that most of the substantial information from Treasury was already out in the week before budget. So by the time we got to budget lock-up, knew that. There was nothing like, we didn't expect that. So whether they're going to do that sort of drip feed, I don't know. I haven't seen much in the news about new announcements.
Well, the cyber security is pretty exciting.
It quickly got subsumed though, didn't it? It sort of got picked up on one news cycle, but I didn't see much discussion of it thereafter. It seemed like there were quite a lot of possibilities for government and private enterprise to collaborate on that sort of thing. But whether the amount of funding that was allocated to it was suitable for the level of challenge or threat that cybersecurity presents, not quite sure. The US is spending, I think, $23 billion on cybersecurity. So even if you were to go pro rata by population, we're still off by a factor of 10. So how seriously the government's taking it, I'm not quite sure. In terms of putting money towards programs.
So there's no way to sex it up, is there?
Really? No. Unless they're being very, very disciplined and keeping some big banner announcement for budget night. But that, I guess, would be playing against type, at least for the last couple of years. And given that the Prime Minister has a bit of an internal popularity problem in his own party, if there were something to be leaked, it would have been. And the fact that it hasn't seems to indicate there's probably not much there. Right. So that, I guess we can segue into the election. So the most recent Australian news poll figures are predicting a swing away from the government of 4.6%. And this is the risk that the government's going to run with the double dissolution, is that they may not actually win the election. It's a great bet if you win. But if the 4.6% swing that the news poll's predicting actually comes to pass, the Parliament's going to come back with similar numbers that Kevin Rudd had in 2007. There'll be a reasonably strong Labor majority in the lower house. With that in mind, though, what happens if the coalition comes back to government but they still don't have a majority in the Senate? They're still going to want to pass these Building and Construction Commission bills, and so they're going to have them run through the Parliament one more time. They'll get blocked in the Senate again if that's the makeup of the Parliament. But it does leave one more possibility to get the bills passed, and this is the joint sitting provisions. So that if the bills go through the Parliament 3 times, don't pass, the Prime Minister can ask the Governor-General to convene a joint sitting, that the House and the Senate all sit together, and it's the cumulative total of the votes that's applied to those bills. So if that sort of sitting were held with the current makeup of the Parliament, so in the reps at the moment, the Coalition has 90 seats, Labor's got 55, Greens have got 1, and there are 4 others. So the government can easily get its legislation through the reps. On the other hand, of the 76 seats in the Senate, Coalition's got 33, Labor 25, Greens have got 10, and others have got 8. So they can block government legislation reasonably easily. But if we look at the combined total of the 226 seats, the Coalition has 123, Labor has 80, Greens 11, and others 12. So as the Parliament stands right now, if there were a hypothetical joint sitting held today, they'd have more than the 114 votes they'd need for a majority, and they wouldn't need to make any deals with crossbenchers. Of course, the results of the election, which is, if they do call that double dissolution, will probably be on the 2nd of July. That's probably going to change those numbers.
So is it just that one bill?
So there are 2 bills. There's a Building and Construction bill and a Building and Construction consequential.
It's just to do with it.
It's a pair of cognated bills. Yeah. And if they did have that, then they could also re-examine other blocked bills, like the Registered Organisations Bill. And they'd probably try and get those three through at the same time.
So they can do different bills?
Yes.
Can they do anything? Or everything?
I think they can only do that with blocked bills.
Only block?
Yes. I think otherwise the temptation would be there just to revive every single piece of legislation and just go through and just tick it all off. We couldn't get that, we'll have that. Everything that they couldn't get done in the last 2.5 years, they could revive. So it'll just be the ones that have gone through the Parliament those 2 times.
Twice.
That's right. So we'll just take a quick break here. Does anyone have any other questions on the Parliament at the moment? What else is happening? The election or the budget?
Capital gain, maybe talk
About capital gains tax?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They refused.
Yes. So Labor's promised to halve the capital gains tax discount if it wins the next election. The government is framing that as a 50% increase in capital gains tax rather than a halving of an already existing discount. And I think the Prime Minister, that's just another internal point of pressure for him that other members of his party are hearing from their constituencies, and people who support the Liberal Party or who support the coalition, people who donate to the coalition, are very much against those sorts of changes to capital gains tax. So it's as much internal pressure as it is pressure from the wider public.
So do you know what's the percentage of public opinion against or?
I think it very much depends on how the question is phrased. And there is that competition on at the moment as to how to frame the debates around negative gearing and around capital gains tax. So the government is using the frame at the moment that half of people who are negatively gearing residential property are earning $80,000 a year, which makes it sound as though someone on the average income could very easily be owning residential property as an investment. What they're not actually mentioning in that frame, though, is that that's the taxable income of those people after all of their deductions. So they're earning a lot more in raw income, and it's through negative gearing that they're reducing their taxable income to $80,000. So it's not necessarily people on $80,000 salaries who are doing this. And the Grattan Institute has released a report in the last week that indicated something to that effect, that by and large the people who are negatively gearing property are the people you would expect. People on six-figure incomes who have the money that you would need to buy residential property and who would derive the most benefit of reducing their taxable income. Okay. Were there any other questions at this stage?
Just with the joint sitting, do people think that's going to happen initially? So the first session would be a joint? Because I've heard something like that's the way that they're going to get the three bills through right at the beginning.
So what would actually have to happen is that the Parliament would reconvene for normal sittings. The bills would be brought up one more time at that new Parliament so that then the government can say, look, we had 2 goes last time. We said, right, let's get rid of everyone, come back with all new people. It's got blocked again. We need to do something different. At that point, that's when the Prime Minister would ask the Governor-General to convene a joint sitting.
You couldn't do that now?
Not
Right,
right
yeah,
now,
no.
no. The joint sitting provisions only exist after a double dissolution.
Oh, after, right, okay. So immediately after?
Yeah, it's a drastic measure that is at the end of a long string of events.
But is there a time frame in which that has to happen? So after 6 months, you can't do the joint sitting?
I think it would depend on how those bills progress. The government would be expected to put all possible effort into passing those bills. But I don't.
Those bills take a long time.
That's
to
right.
get through.
Yeah, albeit they have been discussed to death at this point. So
But if you have new people or whatever, so a lot of people are
Yeah.
retiring.
they are, aren't they? Yeah. So you might imagine that some of the new people might want to have something to say about it. But I guess it would depend on. I will find out a definitive answer for you whether there is an absolute time, a cut-off date, if you will.
Which you can't.
Yeah.
So for any bill that's been rejected 3 times, you can have a joint sitting.
You can ask for one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just to be clear, I've understood the joint sitting, the majority would be from that joint sitting.
From the whole.
That's right. So you put them all together.
Exactly
and
right.
there's 50
Yeah.
Liberals in the lower house, argument's sake, and
Yeah.
20 in the upper house, and they become 70.
Exactly right. Yeah. Okay.
Would this be a filibuster type thing? Or they just sit there and debate?
So
and
with those provisions, it's not just to vote the bill down. The language that is used is to fail to pass. That includes filibustering. So if the bills are hopelessly deadlocked by the use of filibuster, the government can also use that as a reason to request that sort of joint sitting.
And the joint sitting just start at this time and keep going until you've dealt with everything? Or do you just have the usual, okay, Monday we sit these hours, Tuesday we're going to sit these hours?
I don't know, but I'll find out for you.
I just sort of wonder.
Yeah.
Very
It's been a long. It's been a while since it's been done, so yeah.
Oh, well, I guess we'll all learn something.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will get your email address and I'll come back to you with an answer on
Oh,
that.
it was just more out of interest.
Yeah.
Don't stop everything.
Oh no, but just from all of the questions that I've had over the last couple of weeks as to what does that mean, I've in more than one instance I said, here's what I think it means. Let me go and find out for certain for you. Okay. So we'll move away from Parliament and the election for a moment, and we'll move on to the new Federal Register of Legislation. Now, this was something that, when the relevant Act went through last year, there was a bit of concern as to what does this mean? Are we still going to have common law? Why are they taking common law away from me? But having used it since the changeover, at least I've found it's got all of the things that common law had in very much the same places that it had them. And
Can I just say something here? We also have the guys from whatever they call now, Federal Register legislation.
Yeah.
They talked to us end of May, I think.
Oh, great.
I'll let you know, James.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty exciting to have a couple of federal bureaucrats talk to us. They're fascinating to deal with. Fascinating.
Always very helpful.
That's all right. I'm being safe. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there was a bit of apprehension. We were all a bit apprehensive as to what was going to happen with it, because it's something, of course, that we rely on a lot to get that primary source material. But as I said, all of the things are still in much the same place that they were, and they've just rolled in the Acts database to it now as well.
What database?
The Acts database.
Okay.
Yep. So there were a couple of notable changes. Select legislative instruments. So there's usually about 2,000 legislative instruments published, give or take, in any year. About 10% of those were generally designated as select legislative instruments. And according to the Register of Legislation website, it was saying they consisted mostly of regulations and rules of court. The series started after the repeal of the Statutory Rules Publication Act 1903 on the 1st of January 2005, and that select legislative instruments were available until the end of 2015, at which time SLI numbering was ceased. I haven't found any information as to why it was ceased. It's just they're no longer choosing to designate any legislative instruments as select.
Well, that's what they said to me.
Oh, right.
Because we used to get, I'm from the federal court, so
Right.
we have our things on freely.
Yeah.
And they just said, no, they're not giving the numbers anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to check what happened to the stuff we passed afterwards to see what numbers, because you've got to have a number, because you can't find it otherwise.
Yeah.
Because they might pass hundreds
That's
of
right.
those things. And
Yeah. So I guess now the only way you can refer to it is just by the frilly number.
Well, that's exactly right. So giving it a number.
Mm.
There is, it's the year
Mm.
plus something else.
It's
Plus a letter and then
Yes.
some
F 2016 L
L.
number.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they don't have that
That's what I
in-body numbering that the select legislative instruments used to have. And like you say, I haven't been able to find a reason for that other
I
than
think something
that
about
we
the
stopped.
cessation of printing and hard copy.
Oh,
That's what
Yes, I think that's sort of.
We inquired about it and that's
okay.
what we were told.
Hmm. So it raised a bit of a question for us because on the Capital Monitor website, under the federal section, we had regulations, and that we used just for select legislative instruments. And with there not being much fanfare as to the ceasing of them, it was a month or two before we thought, why don't we have any content under our regulations section? I know it doesn't have all of them, but it should have something. And that was when we went and did the research and found out that no, there won't be any more select legislative instruments. So that section is empty at the moment. But what we're planning to do is to put all legislative instruments under that section. So just tweak the filtering rule that rather than saying select legislative instrument, just says legislative instrument and puts everything under there. So there'll be vastly more content in there than there has been in the past, but there will be content rather than none. So that'll just take a while to sort out with our IT people.
So it makes it harder to find things, doesn't it? Which eventually is.
It does, because the select legislative instruments were designated for a reason, and now that they're no longer designating anything, like you say, the more important ones, you know, whether it's ASIC instruments or things of that nature, can get lost in a flow of, you know, veterans. Sometimes you get 50 Veterans Affairs designations on various types of illnesses.
Or the migration stuff. I mean, how are you going to find that?
Yeah.
You can filter by regulations and core rules
Mm.
that you cite that.
Yes.
Is a regulation a select instrument?
It's basically the same.
Hmm.
SLIs
I don't read it like
regulations
basically
and
the
core
same.
rules.
Sounds a bit dodgy to me.
Yeah.
We used to have links to the SLIs and they transferred over to a category that's regulations and core rules.
Yeah. So the SLIs were a subset of all frillies, but now it's just one agglomeration. Yeah. Okay. And the other change that I've noticed that they're putting on the site now is notifiable instruments. They just sort of popped up this year. I don't remember having seen them on ComLaw in years past. And so I did a bit of research as to what they actually are. They don't sound particularly different to legislative instruments in that the site is saying that they are laws on matters of detail made by a person or body authorised to do so. So an instrument has that. What else? Some are commencement instruments, and I guess the big difference between them and the regular legislative instruments is there's no explanatory material for them. They're just a standalone instrument, and they're not subject to parliamentary disallowance in the same way that a legislative instrument would be. And they don't automatically sunset 10 years after commencement. So there've only been 5 this year, so they appear to be being used fairly sparingly. So we've had a Trade Legislation Amendment Commencement Proclamation, Narcotic Drugs Amendment Commencement Proclamation, Census and Statistics Population and Housing Notice. So they appear to be a more general type of notice rather than setting out a new policy the way that a regular legislative instrument would. Yeah.
Do we know why?
No, I don't. I guess that if they wanted to do something that isn't subject to parliamentary disallowance.
I find it hard to believe they're not.
Yeah, but they've only done 5 this year, so yeah, there doesn't appear to be anything to worry about.
Okay,
It's not like ministers have thought, right, let's put some new policy in and not have any scrutiny. Yeah.
The sunsetting thing must cause a lot of problems because our bankruptcy rules sunsetted. We're going to sunset this year. 1st of April, we're going to sunset. So isn't there a lot of time and effort redo? Because there's an opportunity to redo it. So I don't know whether we drove OPC mad or not, but it's a big effort. Every 10 years to redo these things.
Yeah, so I remember seeing a flood of ASIC-related legislative instruments and financial instruments that all appeared to be sunsetting at about the same time. Yeah, that it would have all come out within the last 2 months. Yeah. Okay.
So James, just talk about ASIC.
Yeah.
Well, does all the stuff that ASIC put out go through Frilly or Federal Register of Legislation, so that all those weird things, that instruments and does everything come through the Federal Register?
Not necessarily. So a lot of things do where they are doing it by way of instrument, but some of it is done more just if they're putting out more informative type of stuff, then they'll put it out through media release, through product notes. So there are quite a lot of different places on the ASIC website that we monitor in order to get everything that ASIC does.
The ones I'm particularly interested in is ones that allow exceptions.
Yes.
Exceptions in the legislation.
Yeah.
You can do this.
As far as I know, they are done through legislative instrument. Yeah. Or through their gazette. Yeah, I think the exceptions, I'll generally expect to find those in the gazette rather than instrument.
Rather than Federal Register?
Yeah. Having talked about ASIC, I guess we can go into a bit broader of a discussion about how to use that sort of information. So, as you're talking about having to be aware of all of those different bits of financial regulation, all of that poses some level of risk and opportunity if you can be aware of it before your competitors. So legislative change, regulatory change, policy change, all of these things pose risks for businesses. And being able to quickly respond to those risks gives you an opportunity to outpace your competitors. As librarians, having that awareness and having the information ready so that when someone does call you with a research inquiry, you can have that information for them straight away. Or if you know that someone's working on a particular matter, being able to take that information to them before they know that they need it. That builds your own professional profile. And from the point of view of lawyers in practice, having that information, that being able to call the customer before they call you is a big advantage. So that if you've just got some new ASIC regulation, some new bill that's amending the Corporations Act, if as a corporate lawyer you've got that information before the story's been digested and put out on the news, you can call your clients and say, this is coming up, this is going to affect your business, and here's what I think you need to do about it. again, that raises your professional profile and delivers a great service to your clients. Another thing that Capital Monitor is going to be valuable for is identifying legislative and policy change in its earliest stages. And we'll have those sorts of things, whether it's exposure drafts of legislation, whether it's calls for submissions on new policy, drafts of documents. We'll get all those sorts of documents and we'll have those sent out to customers as soon as possible, so that customers will have the opportunity to see what the government's intentions are and be able to affect them before a bill has even hit the Parliament, to be able to get onto lobbying, to be able to get onto industry bodies and say, this is what's coming up. We've got an opportunity to change policy at its earliest stage before it becomes set in some legislative form. Now, all of those things can be used to drive business for law firms. In terms of new government spending announcements. So in the budget before last, there was a heck of a lot of announcements about infrastructure policy, new road funding, new airports, all of those sorts of things. These are going to be huge commercial projects you want to be able to advise your clients on. Knowing what they are, knowing what sort of money's involved and where that money's going, lets you have those conversations with your clients, rather than having clients call you and say, how do I get involved in this? Other things. So we'll also have announcements about government procurement, government contracts, again, getting that information at the very earliest stage so that you can advise your clients as to what's coming up. Now, with the alerts that we send out, be generally familiar with them, but I'll just go into them to give you an idea of the different types of things and what level of timeliness they offer. So with all of our alerts, our goal is to send customers all the information that they want and nothing that they don't. So there are various levels of, you can have quite broad alerts. They're going to send you a heck of a lot of information. If that's what you want, to make sure you absolutely don't miss anything, but you may have to do a bit of sorting of it yourself, down to very narrowly targeted alerts that will only send you the very specific things that you want. So with the instant alerts that we send out, these alerts provide the most rapid notification. As soon as our sub-editors have gone and got a document, one of our managers will be assessing that and sending it out to customers based on their monitoring brief. So there is actually a human involved in the process saying, here are the particular topics that people have subscribed to that I think it's going to be relevant to them. And this covers all federal materials, so that's legislation, regulation, high court decisions, media releases, speeches, transcripts, and tax rulings and gazette notices, for example. Now, at a one level below that, or slightly less timely, because these alerts are only triggered when we've uploaded things, which we would do immediately after sending out those instant alerts, would be the CapMon alerts. These are all pre-packaged alerts, keyword searches that will automatically generate alerts that can send you the information in a variety of different ways, whether it's sending you a single email with the document attached as soon as the information's available, or just sending you that email with a link to the document. We also offer daily and weekly digests of information if you don't want things just hitting your inbox all day, but want to get an email that's in your inbox first thing in the morning that has everything from the previous day. You can set up those alerts, or we can help you set them up so that you get the information the way that you want it. The personal alerts are similar to the CapMon alerts, but they're something that you'd either create yourself or that we can create for you, or if you can say, I'm looking for these types of information and not those, one of my colleagues can craft a search for you that will pick up exactly the information you want and exclude as much as possible of the information you don't. Often there's a bit of tweaking with the Boolean search language, so crafting those alerts that it's going to get the information for you. Another thing that's really valuable, I think, is the Bills Monitor updates. So whenever federal parliament's sitting, one of the managers will be updating the federal bills monitor in real time as the information. We're watching Parliament all day, and as the bills are introduced to or are discussed in Parliament, all of that information is being updated straight away on the federal bills monitor. And we'll send out alerts about that twice a day. So late morning or early afternoon, after any bills have been introduced for the day, we'll send out an email with the list of all of the bills that were introduced. The following morning, we'll send out an email that has everything that was discussed the previous day and where it got up to. So at a glance, you can see all the bills that have been discussed in Parliament the previous day, which house they're in and what stage they're at. I also look after state bills monitors, and each bills monitor has an ACTA-centred page, so you've got all of the information of any legislation that's passed those parliaments during the year. We've got ACTA-centred pages for New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Victoria and Western Australia. Of those, all but South Australia are updated the following day because that's as early as we can get the information. The Hansard's published the morning after the day before. South Australia are updated 2 days after because the Hansard only comes out very late the following day. Yeah. That's it. So that's as much as I have in my presentation. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. With the instant alerts, can you get those as an RSS feed, or are they more personal? Yeah.
They are manually created emails. Yeah.
Okay.
So it would be the CapMon alerts that you'd use to get your RSS feeds from.
Which we do, yeah. And do you, one other thing that we were talking about earlier today is practice notes from the various courts. Do you keep a collection of those? And
I don't recall ever seeing them, but I'll make a note of that.
Very fantastic.
yeah.
Well, no, they're issued by the courts.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they're on
They're
the...
not, no, the OPC, for example, Commonwealth Wise doesn't issue it.
Yeah.
Right.
The
But,
court
the court,
actually
but
issues.
to have them sort of, to be able to get updates on them,
Yeah.
sort of what
What
we're
you can
doing.
do for federal court one,
Yeah.
you can just subscribe to our news.
Yeah, no, that's a million.
Yeah.
Things come
Of course.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'll
so-
have a second meeting for the court, but
Mm.
state.
Yeah, the state, yeah.
Yes,
State and like
Is it
Victoria.
Victoria, right?
Yes.
They're the ones we need rather than.
So if I can just check with you, so each individual court would issue its own practice notes, is that
Yes.
right? Okay. That's something I'll look at adding to our collection. Yeah,
and I
if that's
imagine
something
they
that's
are
going to be
posting
useful to.
online, but it's just sort of being keeping on track on top of them.
Even the rules,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Court rules. Yeah.
are they on Capital Monitor?
I think court rules are generally published as legislative instruments, statutory instruments, that sort of thing. So I believe so.
So you want just one source.
Question.
Yeah.
You know how Lexis are redoing their platform? Will that include Capital Monitor?
That'd be good.
Fair enough.
Yes and no. Will it directly include it? I don't think so. I think Capital Monitor will still operate as its own standalone thing. But we are in the early stages of planning a redesign of the Capital Monitor website.
Okay.
So I think the website at the moment's it's showing its age. So that. So yeah, we're going through the business case stage at the moment of getting the website redesigned, and hopefully with that we'll be able to redesign some of the processes that we do so that we can get the information out to you even more quickly.
Just on that, James, the searching,
Yeah.
the search engine behind, what Alan was trying to talk about,
Mhm.
is that the same search engine that I don't want to age myself again, is that the same search engine that was used all those years ago?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay. So what search engine is there now? Is that the one that's used by LexisNexis?
I don't believe so, no. I believe the new LexisNexis platforms are using a different search engine altogether.
Because that also impacts on, as Katie's nodding, on trying to find things.
Definitely. And yeah,
the operators can be a little bit cumbersome, and you can't necessarily nest them in a very sort of sophisticated way.
Yeah.
So you can get a bit funky. But, and we always have to make sure that all our grads know that it's a different system. But,
Yeah. And that's what we've found, that especially for people who are used to things like Google search, which is quite forgiving, I think the Capital Monitor site is closer to the other end of that spectrum, that you do need to be quite specific about what you're looking for, that if you put a spelling mistake in a word, then you won't find that word. Whereas a Google search will come back and say, did you mean this? Yes, I did, thank you very much. So I believe that any redesign of the site would involve moving towards a new search engine that I would hope, would have some of those capabilities that people would expect of a modern search engine.
If you do, it'd be great to involve Ala in some of that processes, because kind of works okay now. I can't imagine what some IT guys are going to think of how it's ordered. If we're searching for, say, an order back in 1990, which is that big, on that big a document, I can imagine some IT guys say, who the hell would want to, that's on page 300, who'd be interested in that? Nobody.
Well, at the moment, our search engine does fully index all the text of documents, and any replacement that we were looking for, we'd be expecting those same criteria. It wouldn't be good enough just to say we'll just search the first X pages of a document.
It searches the whole thing, but they're all, is it, like something like that would be miles down.
Oh, I understand. Okay.
Miles down the list.
Right. Okay. So, trying to put the question out there, is there anything that you'd like the Capital Monitor site or services to do that they don't, or would you like them to do it in a different way?
I find it hard when you're downloading a number of documents and you can't see which documents you've downloaded because they all stay the same colour. So I guess, because what we often have to do is download multiple documents and send them off to clients. It'd be good to be able to sort of tick a box and just send a link or.
That is definitely a feature that we've heard requested a few times. That's something that we plan to include in any future release. At the moment, say if you're searching and you come up with 50 results, if you want to download all 50, you'd have to go through and so a select all function, a download all, or a send ticked documents to, those sorts of functions are things that we'd like to build in as well.
Yeah, the link to search results is really important.
I think also sometimes how it defaults to the current year. I think sometimes that can be a bit.
Where is that?
Does it still do that, or it used to?
I think you used to have to. I think it used to
have
do
to.
that. I don't think it's
within the legislation, you can search within particular types of legislation. That media topic is often that's a broad sort of topic, and you can drill down further once you get into the zone. So having that option initially.
Okay. So in a similar way to under legislation, that you could separate that out by bills, acts, so on and so forth, separating out the media types as well, say into transcripts.
Even further.
That's great, thank you.
So we're done.
Okay. Forward at that point. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming today and listening.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks, James. That was fantastic.
Thank you very much.
A surprise, I don't know what this is. Blokes have organised this, obviously.
That's lovely.
Thank you. That was great. Look, I learned a lot. It was really great to hear about the Federal Register, and you guys are thinking about redoing your database. That was that'd be a good one, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you very much. So.
Yeah, just leave everything in here, that's fine.